Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this morning. I'm Paula Fontana. I'm VP of Marketing here at Illuminar. And I'm just going to take you through some details for our agenda today, and then we'll make some introductions for our fantastic panel, and we'll get started. So as you know, we're here to talk about how the cultural aspects of resilience and how we can use tools like wargaming and simulations to really help our organizations supercharge their decision-making in complex times. And we're going to talk a bit about some of the challenges on that path and some of the ways that leading organizations have navigated some of those challenges. And we'll wrap things up here with some Q&A at the end. But as you know, these webinars tend to be very interactive. So please hop in the chat. Please participate in the conversation. There are no wrong answers, especially with this topic. I think anytime you're talking about building culture, I think that, as we know, can be an enormous challenge for organizations. And so in the concept of using wargaming or simulations as a facet of that is still pretty new. So please jump in with your thoughts in the chat box, raise your hand if you want to join. If you think this is absolutely not doable, we want to hear from you as well about that. We are recording today's session. The slides in the recording will be available on our website later today. And as you know, we use interactive polling software by the name of Mentimeter. So have your phones ready, scan the QR code that'll take you straight away to the poll, or you can visit menti.com on your browser and enter code 89505179. So with that, and take a minute to let our panel introduce themselves. As I mentioned, I'm VP of Global Marketing here at Illuminar. I've been in and out of the industry really across the tenure of my career. You started my career actually at Lucent Technologies, leading emergency management software there. You spent some time at Kroll, leading third-party risk management solutions, later turned into more of a GRC, and then, of course, Fusion Risk Management just prior to me being here at Illuminar. So Andrew, do you want to take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me today, and looking forward to the dialogue with Lester, Paul, and Marcus. It's going to be a good one. My name's Andrew Outlet, and over the last 17 years, I've led corporate security and cybersecurity programs, most recently leading as the most senior security leader for a $3 billion supply chain in internet e-commerce. I'm really excited about this topic because I think this topic is, number one, relevant, but number two, really difficult. And we were actually talking about that as we prepared for today. So having difficult conversations that are also authentic are really important to help shift the industry in the right direction. So really excited for that. Thank you.
Awesome. Lester?
Yeah. So thank you for having me. My name's Lester Chen. I'm based out of Toronto, Canada. I spent my first half of my career in the Singapore Navy, where this particular topic has been my specialization. So I ran the Naval Wargaming and Simulation Center for the Navy, focusing on training our crew for naval warfare and tactics. I took that wargaming and exercise experience and shifted into the corporate world, where I think the last 4.5 years I've been running exercises in the financial sector. So focusing on the cybersecurity, physical security, crisis management space. So yeah, looking forward to this interesting and passion topic of mine. So
absolutely. We're thrilled to have you both. Marcus?
Yeah, hey everyone. So Marcus Vaughan, one of the co-founders of Illuminar. I've spent most of my career nerding out on resilience. cut my teeth at Aon and the global risk consulting team many years ago now in risk management. More often found my way into resilience, into consulting, and then now in, I guess, the technology space, co-founding and very much customer focused with Illumina now, and just as Lester alluded to, this is definitely a passion topic. I think this is something I think about during pretty much every waking hour of the day, and I'm pretty sure I've had dreams about it too. So yeah, this is going to be a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to it.
Now that's when you know you're dedicated.
Obsessed.
You're even dreaming wargaming.
Yeah, correct.
Like your Sims. So I think, this is something that I think we can all agree upon. Disruption is the new normal. And in a lot of ways, it's about how readily we're able to embrace it, adapt to it, and really develop new strategies to thrive. And so I think what has been more evident more recently is well, what are some of those strategies that we can employ that really lead us into the future and really allow us to co-create the future, if you will, alongside fast-paced change. So we're going to open with a poll here just to get things started. So if you want to pop into Menti or scan the QR code and join our first poll, the code is 89505179. So the first question is, how important do you believe organizational culture is for building resilience in today's fast-paced business world? And while people answer, I'm going to pose that same question to our panel. And I'm going to start off with Andrew, because I know this is something we were back and forth about a bit over the weekend. But what are your thoughts here?
So organizational culture is a heavy topic. I think everybody can probably agree with that. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's something that takes a lot of time, energy, effort to actually shift a culture. I think it's synonymous for resilience, and we'll dig into that a little bit more today, but it's super important in an organization. We're always taught you need that buy-in from all levels of stakeholders, but at the end of the day and in reality, it's really hard to get. And if a culture doesn't have positive reinforcement and positivity, but instead of just do type of attitude, as I like to say, it's really hard to be successful. I think one of the things that I like to say is, if you experience people that are defensive, resistant to a conversation, too busy to listen, always multitasking, never taking time off, emailing at weird hours, like if that's a part of the culture, then how do you shift the conversation to something a little bit more positive, bringing in resilience and everything? It's difficult. So is it important? Yes, it's extremely important. Is it easy? No, it's not.
Yeah, well, aside from the emailing at weird hours, because at Illumina we do that all the time because we're basically a global company. So I feel like it's always a weird hour for us. But Lester, wanted to chat with you about like building on what Andrew just shared, because I know you've had a lot of deep experience in financial services specifically, and oftentimes like that can be this great debate of being compliance centric and what's required by the regulators versus what you need to do in order to build a defensible business. What's your take on that? Is it important to really evolve the culture? Is this really more of a tick in the box exercise?
Yeah. So when I spent some time thinking about it, I sort of related it to what does resilience mean to the individual, and what does it mean to be a resilient person? Before I tie it back to a body of people, essentially what an organization is. So for someone to be resilient, it has usually falls back on a strong belief system or a culture, right? So I think that is almost fundamental to someone being able to bounce back from whatever setbacks that they face. So likewise, I think in a organization which, like I mentioned, it's essentially a collection of people, and yeah, it's almost fundamental for you. If you put resilience before culture, resilience becomes a tool rather than a belief system, a way of thinking, and a framework and a belief system. So and the problem is sometimes we try to force the resilience, and then it becomes a tick in the box because we need to fulfill something, either to show somebody, whether shareholders, regulators, clients, your partners, that you are being resilient. But those, we know it's not sustainable. We know that people do it for the sake of it. Tie back to why we're doing it, and what service are we providing to our clients, our customers, and why we need to shore up our resilience in a particular area. So yeah, I think it's fundamental that the culture is set right. Can it grow together? I think, yeah, certainly so. But forcing resilience in without firstly spending the time to build up that culture, to selling to people why it's important to inculcate that. It's a tricky path to go down, because once you're coined as a means to an end, it's hard to reverse that labeling, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, and Donna and Kim kind of made that point, that top-down piece as well. I think understanding what is the culture in the organization is a really important starting point. So if the culture in the organization is one of compliance and checkbox, that we're having to do it because of a standard or a regulation, and that's all that it's used for, that's a very hard environment to breed true resilience, as opposed to a culture of compliance, which are two, as you all will always find out on game day, are two very different things. You have an organization that, yes, there's folders full of plans that haven't been read for 24 months, versus an organization that has a high level of capability, a huge amount of connectivity across the organization, are able to adapt to a situation and communicate effectively across the organization to respond and build that resilience back in. So I think understanding what is the culture, it's like, to me, it's almost like, is it a culture? It's like, what is the culture and what does that look like at the starting point? And then, to that point that Kim and Donna made, it's like, what does that look like top down? Is there buy-in at the top? Andrew, you just touched on that. If there's not buy-in at the top, how are you going to, move the ship as we continue the journey? So I think that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the concept of resilience archetypes, right? There is no one size fits all, and that you do need to consider your starting point, whether it's, a whole organization, whether it's an individual team, or even, an individual that you're working with on these concepts. Understanding where they're starting from is really important in terms of getting at more of the values and behaviors layer, as opposed to, we must do this because of this regulation. I'm just curious about, how can, and I'm going to open this up for another poll here. Has this group ever used gaming or simulations as a strategy to really shape the culture, or change the way people are making decisions in your organization? Or is that something much more aspirational? And posing that back to the panel, and maybe start with you, Marcus. Have you seen this work at scale?
Yeah, we're starting to, I think, is the important piece there. So we've got some organizations that, a lot of our customers are regulated, of course, but we've also got a number of customers that are not regulated. And what's interesting is that we also see, you would typically go, oh, regulation drives resilience, which, as to my point just earlier, it certainly drives compliance, not necessarily always resilience, depending on the culture and the buy-in from the leadership. But what we do see is like some organizations who have had or do have the buy-in, and quite often that's come from shock therapy of living through real life events that are high impact in nature at all levels, at a strategic level, which has really shocked the crisis management team to really want to do more across the organization in terms of building up that level of resilience, right down to their footprint, which is, vast, where they are instilling, programs, and now we're working with them in terms of things like micro simulations to get a more regular cadence going of understanding what are the shocks that we're potentially exposed to, what do we need to think about in terms of preparing for that particular shock, and then how do we communicate and essentially as a team work more effectively to work through those situations, and by obviously using technology as the force multiplier, able to get over some of those traditional resource constraints that historically we've always been up against. So we certainly are seeing it. Like I said, that's a very different approach to taking a top-down approach of, hey, it has to happen just for regulation, which is a very different conversation that will then ensue out across the organization. So yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, we are seeing that. Yes, we're doing work in that space. It's not easy. We'll probably get onto that soon.
Mm-hmm.
But it does take a lot. But again, to that point that Donna and Kim made straight up, like if you've got that buy-in from the top, and you do have, I guess, a more systematic approach to running that throughout the organization, it is achievable. But I'm interested in Lester and Andrew. I'm interested in your thoughts on this as well.
I think it's interesting. Like one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, Marcus, was if you come into an organization and you have 90 days to do something, my recommendation is to listen and learn about the culture first before you do anything. Because you're starting out fresh. You're bringing a fresh perspective. You have an opportunity to really leave your mark in the form of the relationships that you're forming and the impression you leave with them. To me, like wargaming sounds so incredibly intense, right? And if you know your audience, it may not be intensive for them. If you know the culture, it may not be intensive for them, or they could take it as something that is intense, and that may turn them away from even wanting to work with you. So first off, like I would say wargaming just sounds intense to some, maybe not so much to others. And then second, wargaming can be used to build and assess and execute strategy, a pandemic strategy, a cyber strategy, a human rights strategy. You can assess tolerance, you can identify gaps, you can help people to think through what their tactical steps would be to actually execute. You can give them options of how to execute on a strategy and help them think differently. So for me, I mean, that's how wargaming really enables business to move faster, to do stuff cheaper, to just be more effective, is when you weave it into the strategic element, the strategy element of the organization you're in.
Yeah, I think to build on that, like you're saying, wargaming sounds complex. Like, to be fair, when we go into a corporate organization, or when I started, and I started talking about drills, everyone's like, the only drills we do are fire drills. What are you talking about? Exercises, no one understands what exercises are. Only the BCM folks, they say, yeah, we know what exercises are. We do it once a year. Wargaming, I'll be crucified if I even brought up that term. So I think it's a lot of socialization about what the value that it can bring, and also a lot of the removal of the what do you call that, stigma that you are being evaluated, and your choose your words carefully, because you're going to be marked on how you respond to a particular scenario. And like it or not, the scenarios are all going to be very difficult, because if it's not difficult, you probably answered it in your day-to-day. So socializing that it is non-attributional to the participants. It will not be held against them. This is a safe space to be able to raise whether it's your immediate reaction or novel solutions to a particular scenario. That helps to firstly make everyone comfortable with the nomenclature being thrown around before they even understand how to use it. And I think that's a danger that especially resilience professionals bring into new organizations. We think everyone's familiar with all the terms, but no, it's more likely they're not. But if we lead with the value it brings, the reason for some of these tools to reach the end goal, which is enhancing resilience, then we can slowly, I guess, nudge in the conversation of why it's important, how they can use it. They may not be the immediate responders for security incidents, but all facets of a business can extract value from drills, exercises, wargaming, but they need to understand how it works. They need to, even the simple to us, the simple topic as tabletop, such as tabletop exercises. We all know what they are, but a lot of people don't understand what that means. And if they don't understand what that means, how do we expect them to understand the value it brings? They won't. And therefore, I think it's a and then that would slowly build that comfort level before they fully embrace the power of these tools.
Yeah, and I mean, 100%, Lester. I think words matter. I think like terms like war game will, acutely stress some people out and naturally get them to lean out as opposed to lean in to whatever you're planning. I think that's important to recognize. I think the other piece with that is people have baggage. So if you're coming into an organization and the previous approach to tabletop exercise is a great example, right? Like if they are death by PowerPoint and there is no level of engagement or they are not exciting at all, and essentially you're walking into an organization that's been bored to death for the last 5 years of stuff that has just no spark, then you need to go through an education process of times are changing, we are changing times, and there is a new approach to this, and we are going to bring life to this, because we have to recognize like there may just be baggage there, and that may be feeding a culture of not wanting to lean into resilience because it has been left very dry.
I think that's a really good point, Marcus. And Lester, I think the biggest thing is the approach that you have needs to show the stakeholders that you're not adding work to their plate, right? Yeah. You need to remove work from their plate, and show that you're there to help them get their objectives completed faster. And that's how wargaming, simulations, tabletops, whatever you want to call it, exercises, strategy enablement sessions. The name can change, but like how you do it, the fundamentals may be the same across the board. But you need to learn the business language, the strategy of the organization, and then enable them to do that faster.
Yeah, I think one thing that Donna has actually shared with me, and I know Leah Andrews at Illuminer has also employed similar strategies in the past, is this whole concept of rip from the headlines. Where you take a current event and you pose that to your executive team or even your more immediate team, as a scenario on the fly as a part of your regular team meetings. And I think that can be a very powerful way of integrating that into the fabric of how you operate without it feeling super heavy, right, as a first step. Yes, I think like, and that's one of the things that I particularly appreciate about microsimulations is that it doesn't have to be a multi-hour exercise, locked in a room somewhere or on a web conference. It can be injected really into the fabric of how you operate as an organization and really get people thinking. Andrew, you said in the past, like, well, what if you were to use this, instead of doing a security question at the beginning of the day, maybe this is around a scenario, right? So I think there's all sorts of interesting ways in which to gamify the experience and really, I think the key thing is like provoke it in such a way that gets people thinking, and acknowledging the fact that, like I am not prepared for these situations. And this is important for me, as a service owner, as a business leader, to anticipate and prepare for these events. But I'm just curious, are there, we've acknowledged that, not everyone's coming from the same starting place. We've acknowledged that, some cultures are more readily adaptive than others or open to, some of these newer ideas. Are there specific hallmarks of organizations that make it easier to implement these sorts of strategies, would you say?
Yeah, I think certainly companies, organizations that take a long-term view, they understand that. So a company that I used to work for has been operating for more than 200 years. So if you understand that psyche, that okay, we're gonna be here for the next 100 years, then we're gonna do everything in our power to stay relevant and stay in business. And it's important. And you compare that to maybe a smaller company, a smaller startup that's here for the next big thing and fades away. Then they're not necessarily going to pay so much attention to being resilient for the long run. Yes, resilient for the short term, for whatever milestone that they are aiming to hit. But it ties back to the mindset and culture that they're trying to set up in order to have, I guess, a legacy rather than just hitting a success step. So I think a long-term approach is almost fundamental for anyone to even see this start to succeed. Because if you don't have that view of wanting to serve your customers for 10 decades and hundreds of years, then it's always going to be a challenge to tie it back to the why we're doing all that we can to make sure that the business continues.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about some of the organizations that naturally probably feel somewhat more resilient or invest more into resilience, certainly organizations that are in an industry of having more high impact. I mean, and it sounds funny to say that they're probably experiencing more high impact exposures on a regular basis. Typically do see them, I guess, lean into this because they've just to that point before had probably a little bit more shock therapy than others. But in saying that, like it's a, how do I put it? Like it's a bit of a like we're all exposed. Like every organization's exposed. So I think it's just those that have seen it in real time versus those that haven't yet, and the risk is still theoretical versus those that have seen the risk materialize and become quite tangible and have to deal with the impacts of that high high impact event. So you look at an organization that has been hit by ransomware versus those that haven't, and see what that investment of resilience looks like into cybersecurity, for instance. And I would have it guess that organizations that haven't been hit hard yet are probably still thinking like it's, it is still if as opposed to when, where organizations who have had to, be in that war room at 3 a.m. Dealing with it still trying to work out what the next day looks like, then they're going to have naturally just be more acutely aware and will be investing more into it.
I think that's where you bring in some business metrics to help propel like the importance of doing wargaming simulations, exercises. And what I mean is, if you're that organization that hasn't gotten hit by ransomware, hasn't been exposed to forced labor, hasn't had a catastrophic disruption from an environmental impact to a building, if you're in one of those categories, bringing in business metrics like historically, a business of our size, if impacted in this way, will cost X amount of dollars and will take X amount of time to assess, to identify, assess, and mitigate the disruption. It's going to take homework and research. It's not going to be a one-for-one for the organization, but there is so much information out on the open web that can be pulled in to help propel the importance of doing micro simulations or large-scale exercises. So I always like to relate it back to business terminology, because I think when people can see dollars lost or time lost or even people productivity overall lost, I think it helps make it more relevant for them.
So Marcus and I are kind of on your point of relevance. Marcus and I were fresh out the back of GFMI from last week. So they had a conference on operational resilience, and one of my favorite moments of the conference was, one of the participants had shared a video, which I shared on my LinkedIn this morning. Joel Wolf from AQR. He shared this video that really, I think, drove home the point of the power of building context and building that connectivity across your organization in peacetime. Because when it comes to, because a lot of people will say, well, we've got our playbook, we've got our plan, like we're good, right? But I think the reality is, and we're seeing this especially with compliance as well, is that even though you may have rolled out these plans and playbooks, maybe you've actually put people through a course like Brain Shark or what have you, like they actually haven't been in the moment, with all of the different context that surrounds you in the midst of crisis, and people don't know what to do, right? And so in this particular video, it's a dad, so it's basically a game where he's asked his kids to write down the instructions to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which seems pretty straightforward, right? And but if you follow it very literally, like the results are hilarious, right? And so I think that's, in a lot of ways, this is what we're expecting our organizations to do in crisis: is we hand them a plan, right? Or we hand them a playbook and we say, okay, go, it's game day, let's go. But really what we're looking to build is that overriding context and connectivity that sees you through the event. And so yeah, just want to pose it back to the three of you. Like, what is it that makes wargaming or simulations or exercises or whatever you want to call it, like what makes it uniquely effective in building resilience?
I'm happy to jump in and start that part. I think you just touched on a really good point around building that level of capability. I mean, we always talk about context, capability, and connectivity, but I know that continuous approach to building capability, and obviously, again, not to be too self-promotional, but we're obviously using micro simulations to do that, because it does enable, I guess, a more regular cadence in terms of, putting those situations to people that are, and they're always going to be different. They're always going to be different, because game day is always going to be different. Like one of the best quotes that came out of, unfortunately, the horror story of COVID for a number of years there. I remember one very senior global resilience practitioner saying to me, great that we've got all these learnings from COVID, but the real challenge we have now is just making sure that our organization is actually preparing for the next war, not the last one. And so to that point, by putting, I guess, a variety of different scenarios and variables to people on a more regular basis, you can start thinking not so much about, well, the plan needs to be, checkpoint 1 through to 100 in terms of these are the things, always have to be done, but thinking through those changes in those variables in that context, and how do we need to think about these areas. So by creating like I said, a systematic approach to building that level of capability and putting various different variables to people enables, I guess it provokes that thought, creates that learning, and ultimately creates that level of capability.
Yeah. And I think to add on to that, one of the things that is important but always maybe not always overlooked is how to build trust and how do you build the connections that you will need on a bad day. We assume that when we look at the plans, Team A will do this. Who's Team A? If you haven't met Team A before, it's going to be very scary that you're going to assume like whatever they read on the plan is whatever you understand as the same words mean different things to different people. And that is extrapolated if you start to go outside your company, whether it's a vendor, cloud provider, third party, DFIR firm, lawyers. Imagine talking to lawyers on game day. It's often overlooked fact that everyone understands each other. And you don't want to be arguing over semantics on a bad day. And you also want to be able to trust the person on the other side of the camera that he is going to, when he says he's going to do something, firstly, he's going to do it. Secondly, you understand what he's going to do. Thirdly, he's going to let you know when it's done. And then fourthly, if something screws up, he's going to tell you. It's hard to build that trust in a person to person, unless you've gone through that. You have spent that time understanding his perspective, his difficulties, his resistance to some of your suggestions, to shut off networks, to shut down processes, cut off applications. To you, it's simple, maybe, but if you don't spend the time talking about it, you don't spend the time understanding perspective of your business partners, your technology partners, and you just throw out recommendations from a security practitioner's point of view and a very risk-adverse lens, and you're gonna make a lot of enemies on the day where your friends should be your friends and your enemies are external. And you're gonna be fighting an internal war. Before you know it, it's gonna be self-destructive before you understand who the real enemy is. So I think exercises provide and all these conversations, nobody does them on a day-to-day basis, right? No technology officer is going to spend his time thinking about, oh, what if this goes down? What if this goes down? What can I pull? How can I shore up my resiliency on a bad day? Unfortunately, they are paid to ensure that the technology is pushed out, upgraded, and kept up and running. They don't necessarily are as invested in maybe resiliency or even security measures as those respective professionals are. And therefore, understanding their perspective, explaining your perspective, bring it to the table, if possible, trash it out if necessary, but you don't want to trash it out during an actual event.
Look, I think one of the biggest things, Marcus, Lester, Paula, that we've all said today, but just to be a little bit more direct, like as a business resiliency leader, you're effectively a coach, and you're a coach on game day. And a coach's job is to lead a team or a group of players. A coach's job is to motivate. A coach's job is to identify weaknesses and strengths ahead of game day, right? So if you think of yourself as a coach, and you kind of approach your program as a coach, you're forming those relationships ahead of time, even before any sort of exercise. You're forming those relationships before an actual event. And you're allowing your team to come together to learn about the strengths and weaknesses across the team, the organization that you're in. And I think when you shift your mindset like that, it kind of becomes a little bit easier, using air quotes, to approach conversations, because you need that mindset to be effective.
100%, Andrew. That's an amazing point, actually. And I think also like the role of the coach is to push, right? Like you don't go to training just to do what you think you want to do. You go to training, or even if it's like personal training, to get pushed, like to go beyond, to push into that next level of capability. So that role of the coach is to literally take people outside of their comfort zones. Obviously, bring them in with the carrot, but also push them, like meet them where they are, but push them to the next level. Like that's a really critical part of the journey. And I think, and again, we said at the very start of this session today, like getting that from the top down, it's got to start at the top. And so building that awareness at the top, bringing them in, meeting them where they are, but pushing them and making sure that's a really positive engagement will help start setting that tone so you can roll it out across the organization for sure. But yeah, I couldn't agree more, Andrew. I think that the coaching mentality is just so critical to our industry.
Yeah, it really is that outside in view that I think it's tough for the business to maintain just because they're so close to it and they don't necessarily see that the interconnections with other facets of the business. They're making decisions, that are consistent with the needs of their business line or their particular department, et cetera, et cetera. And I think having that, essentially like business continuity, resilience teams, et cetera, that, we're built to understand how the business operates and how we deliver these services and products to our customers. And so really challenging the business to think about the bigger picture view as well as the detail view, I think is really very important. I can't believe we're almost out of time. I feel like this happens every time. And I want to do a lightning round on key metrics, but just to summarize in terms of the benefits of gamification and what we're talking about in terms of wargaming, micro simulations, et cetera. I think what we're all saying is, there's that engagement aspect, less around like brain training that you see in a lot of these, traditional courses, more about logic puzzles, right? Like posing a challenge to your stakeholders and including your boards, including your executive teams, right? And asking them to solve it. I think it really provokes a lot of deep thinking in terms of the necessity for these sorts of exercises. Putting them in a realistic context. I think that's always been a really powerful thing to watch is putting people in that experience as if it was really happening. Very different than, sort of just punching through the checklist. So putting them in the situation, asking them to respond as if it was happening. And then of course, developing that empathy, really putting your team in the moment before the moment happens. Understanding, Lester, much how you were talking to, right? How do you develop those connections, with other individuals, either within your organization or even your third parties, other people within your ecosystem before that time actually happens? I think also builds the glue that you rely upon come game day. So, but I do want to, before we go to questions, wanted to do a quick lightning round on metrics. What are some of the key metrics that, so say, folks on the call or others, want to implement a wargaming program, micro simulations program, what are the key metrics that they should be using to really demonstrate this is moving the needle? Andrew?
I knew you were going to come to me first.
You know it.
Yeah, I talk about metrics quite a bit. So because of the lightning round, really two points I'd like to make here. Number one, qualitatively, measuring how participants feel before an exercise versus after an exercise. That's very squishy. I like to use that term, but it's important because it gives you something to go off of what was the training effective. That's one measurement that I like to use. The second is more from a quantitative perspective. Before a war game or before an exercise, it took X amount of time to get notified of an incident. After an exercise, I drove alignment with X business leaders and decreased our mean time to notify by X% or X hours, X minutes. Takes a little bit of research, but the outcome to quantitatively tie that together is really good from an engagement perspective with a leadership team. So those are my two.
That's fantastic. Lester?
Yeah, so I think the first one on surveying questions before and after exercises on how many incident response plans does your team, are your teams even aware of? A lot of times, the cyber teams especially, they do their plans on their own. Nobody knows about those plans. Oh, Section A, Appendix B, this team is supposed to do this when this happens. Nobody knows about that if they don't even know your plans exist. So even understanding what the plans are, where your role is in those plans before and after exercises, you will realize during many exercises, like, I've not heard of that plan. After the exercise, let me go and have a look. So I think that's one important thing to capture. The other, which will tie back more to a success and sustenance of a program, is the tracking of action items. I think that's really important to materially demonstrate what changes your program has brought about, and doing that in a systematic or sustained manner, reporting, escalation, all that. Unfortunately, nitty-gritty things that the corporate world loves. I don't know why, but people like seeing numbers on a spreadsheet. But yeah, I mean, if that is what it takes to make a program work, so be it.
Yeah, I think that's a great one, Lester, and that was going to be one of the ones I'd flag as well. As like, assuming you have a systematic approach to simulations and training. How many action items are coming out of those, because that is continuous learning in real time. And if you're actually able to show the metrics off the back of that, hey, yeah, we have run X amount of simulations, micro simulations, war games, whatever it looks like over the last 12 months, and we've been able to generate 20 action items to improve resilience. I mean, that's a good news story that, hey, here's things that we're actively doing to keep our organization as resilient as it can be in the changing environment that we're going through. I think the other one that stands out, we, obviously being in technology, probably get a tailwind with our customers on this, is just what that level of engagement is. People going in and being part of micro simulations on a monthly basis. You're able to, again, from a reporting perspective, so you can show what that looks like. It's we have X amount of people actively involved and engaged in our resilience program like that, because there is no, you don't always win in a micro simulation or a simulation or a war game. You're not winning, but you're engaged. And, so long as there is a good level of quality there, you're thinking about something that's being thrown at you, which, essentially leads to raising up that level of capability. And to your point before, Lester, again, around that connectivity across the organization, that you are meeting other people in the organization, so that when game day rolls around, it's not the first time you're on the camera with them, which is very important. So I think engagement metrics are just absolutely critical. Very basic, but helpful.
I can't think of a better way to end this. On the message of engagement, resilience engagement. So we'll open up to questions or comments if anyone has any before we close things out here. Right, it looks like lots of great comments in the chat. Love this. So I guess if we don't have any questions, we'll just go through a few last closing items here. So if you enjoyed this, want to learn more actually on the topic of feedback loops, action items, coming from exercises, making sure that you're taking those learnings forward. We just launched a new capability in Illuminar focused on learning loops. So these are essentially closing the loop on feedback, and ensuring that you are implementing those learnings at scale. So we've got a couple of folks from the Illuminar team. Leon and Rach will be doing dueling sessions here, one for the US and EMEA, well, more US, I guess. And then also in APAC, they'll be doing a deep dive into the product. And so if you're interested in learning more about learning loops, definitely sign up for that one. If you can't make the session, sign up and we will send you a recording. Katie Belfi and I are doing a webinar next week on personalized strategies for organizational resilience. Super excited about this one. Really building on a lot of the concepts that we discussed earlier this year around resilience archetypes, like how can you deliver resilience strategies that meet individuals where they are. So definitely join us for that one. And then finally, I wanted to highlight, Lester recently published this book on, if you're interested in a lot of the topics that we discussed today, specifically as it relates to cybersecurity, definitely check out Lester's book. Just chock full of strategies to navigate some of the issues and challenges, and really bring your cybersecurity exercise program to life. So definitely check that out. I've read it. It's fantastic. So thank you all for joining us today. As always, if you have any questions about anything that we talked about today or questions about microsims, reach out and we will see you next time.
Thanks very much, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.